For 500 years, the Ashkenazi people have shaped history, but many of their secrets remain hidden. How did they survive wars, exile, and persecution while still influencing the world? What lost traditions, hidden knowledge, and secret networks helped them thrive? From forgotten Jewish kingdoms to underground movements, the truth is deeper than you think. Stay with me till the end, because what you're about to discover will change how you see history forever. Imagine a people whose history is written in whispers, carried across centuries like an unbroken thread of survival. The Ashkenazi Jews, one of the most resilient and mysterious communities in history, did not simply emerge. They endured, evolved, and shaped the very fabric of the world around them. But their origins? That remains one of history's most debated puzzles. Their story begins in the ancient lands of the Middle East, where Jewish merchants, scholars, and exiles navigated the great empires of Babylon, Persia, and Rome. They spoke Hebrew, Aramaic, and later, languages that would become the foundation of a secret linguistic code known as Yiddish. But in the 1st century, disaster struck. The Roman Empire, mighty and merciless, crushed Jewish revolts in Judea. The great city of Jerusalem fell. The temple, once the heart of Jewish faith, was reduced to ruins. Thousands perished, and those who survived were forced into exile, scattered like dust in the wind. Some went south to North Africa, others east to Persia. But one group ventured north, into the unfamiliar, untamed lands of Europe. Who were they really? History's silent debate. As they made their way into the lands of the Franks, the Slavs, and the Germanic tribes, they carried not just their faith, but something far more powerful: knowledge. But here's where history gets complicated. Who were these early Ashkenazi Jews? Some scholars believe they were direct descendants of the Judean exiles, their lineage stretching back to the biblical tribes of Israel. Others argue they intermarried with European and Khazar communities, absorbing local influences while keeping their unique identity intact. A controversial theory even suggests that Ashkenazi Jews might be linked to the lost Khazar kingdom, a powerful but mysterious empire that converted to Judaism in the 8th century before vanishing from history. No matter their exact origins, one thing is clear: wherever they went, they built. They built communities, they built trade routes, and most importantly, they built a way to survive. Secret networks, the lifeline of a people in exile. Europe in the Middle Ages was a dangerous place, filled with shifting alliances, power-hungry rulers, and violent crusades. The Ashkenazi Jews, often seen as outsiders, faced constant threats, from forced conversions to outright massacres. But they had something others didn't: an underground web of survival. While kings and emperors fought over land, Ashkenazi traders created a network that spanned across Europe. They spoke multiple languages, allowing them to act as secret mediators between rival factions. They became moneylenders, merchants, and advisors, not because they sought wealth, but because, in a world that denied them land and security, knowledge and commerce were their only weapons. This hidden network wasn't just about trade. It was about survival. It was about passing messages, warning communities of danger, and ensuring that, even in the darkest times, their people would endure. But how did they keep their culture alive despite centuries of exile? And what hidden traditions did they pass down through generations? The answers lie in the next chapter of their incredible story. The silent power of Ashkenazi scholars and thinkers. A people without land. A people without an army. A people without a home. Yet they survived. Not just survived, they thrived. The Ashkenazi Jews, scattered across foreign lands, denied the right to own property, barred from holding power, and often facing the threat of exile at a moment's notice, found strength in something no ruler could take from them: knowledge. It was their weapon, their shield, their silent revolution. In the flickering candlelight of hidden study houses, wisdom was passed from one generation to the next. While the world around them built fortresses of stone, they built fortresses of the mind, unshakable, indestructible, eternal. But how did a people, so often forced into the shadows, come to influence medicine, philosophy, and science in ways the world still feels today? The answer lies in a tradition unlike any other. From the earliest days of exile, Ashkenazi Jews understood a simple, undeniable truth. Knowledge was survival. They had no armies, no lands to retreat to, no kings to protect them. Their power lay in something greater, the ability to think, to adapt, to master the very skills their oppressors overlooked. While medieval Europe was drowning in ignorance, consumed by war and superstition, the Jewish communities were building something different, an intellectual empire that spanned centuries. The Talmud was more than a book. It was a way of thinking, a relentless pursuit of truth. It taught them to question, to argue, to refine ideas through debate. This intellectual training wasn't just about religion. It was about logic, problem-solving, and a deep hunger for knowledge that extended far beyond the walls of the synagogue. But learning wasn't safe. It was a crime in many places, a risk that could lead to persecution, exile, or death. And so, it had to be hidden. In underground study groups, in secret gatherings, in whispers passed from father to son, teacher to student. Yet even in the darkness, their knowledge grew, and then something happened that changed everything. For centuries, Jewish scholarship had been confined to handwritten manuscripts, carefully copied and protected. But in the 15th century, a new invention changed the world: the printing press. While Christian Europe used it to spread religious doctrine and political propaganda, the Jewish community saw something else: an opportunity, a chance to preserve their history, their teachings, their intellectual legacy. But it wasn't just about preserving, it was about expanding. For the first time, Jewish texts could be printed and distributed across borders, allowing knowledge to spread faster than ever before. Books of philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and even astronomy were printed in Hebrew, Yiddish, and Latin, allowing Ashkenazi scholars to engage in intellectual debates far beyond their isolated communities. Yet, even as knowledge spread, danger followed. Rulers saw education as a threat. The Catholic Church feared what they could not control. Jewish books were burned in city squares, their scholars arrested, their wisdom labeled as heresy. But the Ashkenazi spirit was unbreakable. For every book destroyed, 10 more were written. For every idea suppressed, 100 more were whispered in secret. They were no longer just scholars. They were revolutionaries. By the 17th and 18th centuries, something extraordinary was happening. Ashkenazi thinkers were stepping beyond the boundaries of their communities, engaging with the greatest intellectual minds of their time. They had mastered multiple languages: Hebrew, Yiddish, Latin, German, French. This allowed them to study the works of European scientists and philosophers, while also preserving and advancing their own knowledge. One after another, Jewish thinkers began making breakthroughs that would change history. In medicine, Jewish physicians, trained in both Talmudic logic and the medical texts of the Islamic world, introduced advanced surgical techniques and treatments long before mainstream Europe adopted them. In finance, Jewish scholars, deeply knowledgeable in mathematics, helped shape early banking systems, influencing global trade. In philosophy, the writings of Jewish intellectuals influenced major Enlightenment thinkers, helping lay the foundation for modern political thought. But even as their influence grew, they remained outsiders, welcomed in times of need, cast out when their usefulness had passed. They were invited into royal courts as advisors, only to be expelled when their wisdom was no longer convenient. They were allowed to build, only to have their work stolen or destroyed. Yet they never stopped learning, never stopped questioning, never stopped pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The secret that kept them alive: the power of adaptation. How does a people survive centuries of exile? How do they flourish when the world is against them? While feudal lords built castles and armies, the Ashkenazi Jews built something more powerful, an invisible empire of knowledge, one that could not be burned, stolen, or conquered. They became advisors to kings, doctors to rulers, financiers of empires. They mastered the laws of the lands they lived in, understanding them better than the rulers themselves. They built underground networks of communication, ensuring that knowledge flowed even when borders were closed. And in doing so, they not only survived, they shaped the world around them. Yet their greatest challenge was still to come. For centuries, they had existed in the margins of society, influencing history from the shadows. But soon, the world would change. Revolutions would come. Wars would break out. And the Ashkenazi Jews would find themselves standing at the center of history, facing choices that would define their future. Would they finally be accepted? Or would history repeat itself? What happened next would reshape the Jewish world forever. Stay with me, because the most shocking part of this story is yet to come. Secret societies and underground movements knowledge had kept the Ashkenazi Jews alive, but survival required more than just wisdom. It required secrecy. It required unity in the shadows. For centuries, they had been exiled, persecuted, and forced into the margins of society. Their books were burned, their homes ransacked, their very existence questioned. But they refused to disappear. Instead, they built something hidden: networks of power, secret societies, underground movements that ensured their survival even in the darkest times. This was not just about avoiding persecution. It was about protecting their identity, their traditions, their knowledge. It was about ensuring that, no matter how many times the world tried to erase them, they would always return, stronger than before. In the grand libraries of Europe, knowledge was hoarded by the elite. But in the cramped, dimly lit study houses of the Ashkenazi communities, knowledge flowed freely. These were no ordinary schools. These were secret academies, known as chevruta, where young men sat in pairs, debating the complexities of law, philosophy, and ethics. They did not simply memorize. They argued, they questioned, they dissected ideas until they had wrung every ounce of wisdom from them. But these study groups were more than just places of learning. They were fortresses of resistance. To the outside world, they seemed like simple religious gatherings. But behind closed doors, they became something more: training grounds for survival. Students were not just taught scripture. They were taught how to navigate hostile governments, how to negotiate with rulers, how to preserve their history when the world wanted it erased. These study houses became the lifeline of Ashkenazi Jews. They ensured that even when entire communities were destroyed, their wisdom lived on, hidden in the minds of those who had memorized it. But not all knowledge could be learned in study halls. Some wisdom was older, more mystical, more dangerous. And it was passed down in whispers, from master to student, in secret Kabbalah circles that held the key to mysteries few could comprehend. The forbidden teachings, Kabbalah, and the mystics of the shadows. For centuries, Kabbalah, the mystical teachings of Jewish thought, was a guarded secret. It was not for the ordinary man. It was not something one could simply read in a book. It was passed down through the generations, from the elders to those deemed worthy. And within these teachings lay secrets that could shake the world. Kabbalah was not just spiritual, it was practical. It provided a hidden code, a way of understanding the universe, of reading between the lines of reality. It was a form of power that could not be easily explained, and perhaps that was why it was feared. Christian scholars obsessed over it, desperate to uncover its mysteries. Rulers whispered about its potential, terrified that the Jews held knowledge that could challenge their authority. And so, like everything else, it had to be hidden. The mystical circles of Ashkenazi Jews met in secret, discussing cosmic truths, channeling the wisdom of the past, protecting knowledge that could not fall into the wrong hands. And in times of crisis, when exile and destruction loomed, These circles provided something more than understanding. They provided hope, because to those who followed these teachings, exile was never permanent. Destruction was never final. Redemption would always come. And perhaps that belief, more than anything, was what gave them the strength to endure. But not all secret groups were mystical. Some operated in a different way, in the world of politics, finance, and diplomacy. They were traders, bankers, and spies, men who moved in the shadows, influencing kings and nations without ever revealing their true power. To survive in medieval Europe, the Ashkenazi Jews needed more than knowledge. They needed leverage. And so, they found their place in the one area where rulers had no choice but to rely on them: trade and finance. But this was no ordinary trade. This was a network so vast, so intricate, that it functioned like an underground nation, stretching across borders and centuries. Jewish traders carried silk from the East, spices from the Middle East, gold from the markets of Venice. They spoke multiple languages, moving between Christian and Muslim territories, striking deals that no one else could. And with trade came influence, because rulers, no matter how much they persecuted the Jews, always came back when they needed money. They needed financiers, men who understood the art of commerce, of banking, of lending, and so Jewish bankers became indispensable, funding wars, building cities, keeping entire economies afloat. But this power was dangerous. It made them targets. It made them enemies. And so, they had to be careful. They had to remain unseen, and in this unseen world, some of them became more than just financiers. They became spies. In a time when wars were fought over information as much as weapons, Jewish traders were perfectly positioned to be the ultimate intelligence network. They moved between enemy territories undetected. They could overhear conversations in royal courts, smuggle messages across borders, gather secrets that could change the course of history. Some did it to protect their people, warning Jewish communities of incoming danger. Others did it to gain influence, ensuring that, even in exile, they still had a role to play in shaping the world. But no matter their reason, one thing was clear. While the world saw them as powerless, they had built a hidden empire, one that functioned in silence, influencing the fate of nations without ever being seen. The underground legacy, how these secret societies shaped the future. These hidden networks of study, mysticism, and trade were more than just survival tactics. They were the foundation upon which the future of Ashkenazi Jews would be built. The underground study groups ensured that Jewish knowledge was never lost. The secret Kabbalah circles kept their mystical traditions alive. The traders, bankers, and spies ensured that even when they had no land, they still had power. And because of them, the Ashkenazi Jews did not just endure, they thrived. But their greatest challenge was still ahead. The world was changing. New empires were rising. The old ways of secrecy and survival would soon be tested in ways they had never imagined. Because soon, the Ashkenazi Jews would no longer be just a hidden force in history. They would step into the light, and the world would never be the same again. But what happened when centuries of survival in the shadows came face to face with the forces of revolution, nationalism, and war? Stay with me, because the most dramatic chapter in their story is about to unfold. For centuries, the Ashkenazi Jews had survived in exile, carving out a place for themselves in the margins of empires. Their knowledge had become their shield, their secret societies their fortress. But was that all they were? A people destined to forever live in the shadows of history? Had there been a time when they were not just merchants and scholars, but kings and warriors, rulers of a land that history tried to erase? This is the mystery of the Khazar kingdom, a kingdom that, if the legends are true, may have changed the fate of the Ashkenazi Jews forever. Between the 7th and 10th centuries, a powerful empire rose in Eastern Europe, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Volga River. The Khazars were a fierce nomadic people who controlled one of the most strategic regions in the world, acting as a barrier between the Christian kingdoms of Europe and the expanding Islamic empires of the Middle East. And then, something extraordinary happened. According to historical accounts, the rulers of Khazaria did something no other kingdom had done. They converted to Judaism. Why? Some say it was a political move, a way to stay neutral between the two dominant faiths fighting for control of the region. Others believe the Khazars saw a deeper connection to Jewish teachings, embracing the faith not just for strategy, but for belief. But if this is true, if the Khazars truly became a Jewish kingdom, what happened to them? Where did they go? Some historians believe that when the Khazar Empire fell to invaders in the 10th century, its Jewish rulers and citizens scattered across Eastern Europe, blending into the emerging Ashkenazi communities. If this theory holds, it would mean that the Ashkenazi Jews did not just descend from exiled Judeans, but also from warriors and rulers of a forgotten empire. And yet, the idea of self-governance, of hidden Jewish communities that ruled themselves in secret, did not die with Khazaria. Across Poland and Lithuania, in the cold lands of Eastern Europe, something remarkable was taking shape. Jewish townships that existed beyond the reach of Christian kings. By the 16th century, Poland and Lithuania had become the center of the Ashkenazi Jewish world. While much of Europe still expelled and persecuted them, something strange was happening in these lands. Jews were being allowed to govern themselves, because rulers, seeing their financial expertise and trading connections, granted them special privileges, allowing them to build their own autonomous communities known as kahals. These were no ordinary villages. These were self-sustaining Jewish societies, complete with their own courts, schools, markets, and councils. Within the walls of these townships, Jews lived under their own laws, judged by their own rabbis, protected by a legal system that had been evolving since biblical times. And in the heart of these kahals, something even more extraordinary was happening. The development of a Jewish parliament, known as the Council of Four Lands. For the first time in centuries, Ashkenazi Jews had a central governing body, a council that represented their interests, negotiated with kings, and protected their communities. They were still guests in foreign lands, but within their own walls, they were their own rulers. But these hidden townships were more than just places of safety. They became the intellectual and spiritual heart of the Jewish world. Here, some of the greatest rabbis and scholars of all time emerged, writing books, teaching students, and shaping the very culture that would define Ashkenazi Jews for generations. And then, once again, history struck back. By the late 18th century, Poland was collapsing. War, corruption, and foreign invasions were tearing it apart. And when the land was divided between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, the Jewish townships lost their independence. The council was dissolved. The kahals were dismantled. Once again, the Ashkenazi Jews had lost their safe haven. But exile did not mean extinction. As they had done before, they adapted. Some moved west, into Germany and France. Some found refuge in the Ottoman Empire, where they would build new communities in places no one expected. The unexpected Ashkenazi communities in China and the Ottoman Empire. When we think of the Ashkenazi Jews, we imagine them in the cold winters of Eastern Europe, in the scholarly halls of Poland, in the hidden study houses of Lithuania. But what if I told you that some of them ended up in China? Yes, China. The Kaifeng Jews were a small but thriving Jewish community that had existed in China for centuries, tracing their roots back to Jewish merchants who had traveled along the Silk Road. While most Jewish communities in Asia were Sephardic, some records suggest that Ashkenazi traders and refugees also made their way east, settling in China to escape European persecution. Though their numbers were small, they became part of China's unique cultural fabric, blending Jewish traditions with local customs. But isolation took its toll. Over time, their knowledge of Hebrew faded, their traditions weakened, and by the 19th century, their Jewish identity had nearly disappeared. Yet they were not the only Ashkenazi Jews to find new homes outside Europe. The Ottoman Empire, stretching across the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Eastern Europe, became an unexpected refuge for Ashkenazi Jews fleeing persecution. While the Sephardic Jews had lived under Ottoman rule for centuries, the arrival of Ashkenazi refugees brought a new dynamic. Unlike Christian Europe, where Jews were seen as outsiders, the Ottomans classified them as people of the book, granting them a level of religious protection. Here, Ashkenazi Jews were able to rebuild. They opened printing presses, established trade networks, and even formed new alliances with Sephardic Jews, blending traditions in ways that had never happened before. They had once again found a way to survive. A pattern of survival. The legacy of hidden kingdoms and lost communities over and over, history tried to erase the Ashkenazi Jews. But every time they reappeared, reshaped, reborn. The lost Khazar kingdom may have faded into legend, but its spirit of independence lived on in the self-governing townships of Poland and Lithuania. The destruction of these Jewish communities in Europe forced them to seek refuge in the most unexpected corners of the world. From the bustling streets of China to the grand cities of the Ottoman Empire, they never stopped adapting. They never stopped rebuilding. But now the world was about to change. Empires would crumble, revolutions would erupt, and for the first time in modern history, the Ashkenazi Jews would face a challenge unlike anything before. Would they finally be accepted? Or was the greatest tragedy of their history still waiting ahead? Stay with me, because the most shocking part of this story is about to unfold. For centuries, the Ashkenazi Jews had lived on the edge of extinction, caught between rulers who needed them and mobs that wanted them gone. Every expulsion, every massacre, every law meant to weaken them only forced them to grow stronger, smarter, more adaptable. But how did they do it? How did a people denied land, denied rights, denied even the security of permanence, manage to not only survive but thrive? The answer lay in a network of hidden strategies, secrets passed down through generations, whispered in the dark, carved into the unshakable spirit of a people who refused to disappear. In medieval Europe, borders were rigid. Kingdoms were locked in constant war. Rulers fought for power, and trade was tightly controlled. But while kings battled over land, another invisible empire was growing beneath their feet. An empire of Jewish merchants, financiers, and traders who navigated the chaos like ghosts slipping through the cracks of history. The Ashkenazi Jews, though forbidden from owning land, found power in something even greater: commerce. While Christian guilds barred them from traditional trades, they built alternative economies, underground markets that thrived beyond the reach of local laws. They became the crucial link between feuding nations, moving silk, spices, and precious metals across enemy lines. They developed credit systems that allowed money to travel faster than armies, a financial web so intricate that kings and emperors, no matter how much they despised them, had no choice but to rely on their expertise. It was an empire with no borders, no armies, no flags, only loyalty, knowledge, and an understanding that in a world built on war, those who controlled trade controlled destiny. But commerce alone was not enough. Information was power, and survival depended on one thing: secrecy. So, the Ashkenazi Jews developed something that baffled outsiders and protected them in ways no weapon ever could: language as a shield. Yiddish was not just a dialect. It was a secret code, a language woven from Hebrew, German, Slavic, and traces of Latin. A linguistic maze that only insiders could navigate. It allowed them to communicate across vast distances without outsiders ever knowing what was being said. In a world where a single misunderstanding could mean death, Yiddish became their silent protection. Even Hebrew itself, though ancient, was repurposed as a hidden language of resilience. Used in scholarly texts, in trade records, in messages passed through underground networks. Words were their armor. Sentences were their walls. And when language wasn't enough, they had something else. Self-defense hidden in plain sight. Fighting without weapons. The unseen art of survival. They were forbidden from bearing arms. Outlawed from forming militias. Forced to rely on rulers who saw them as nothing more than tools for their own gain. But they never waited for someone else to save them. In secret, they developed self-defense strategies, techniques that required no weapons, only intelligence, agility, and the ability to turn an enemy's strength against them. They trained in quick escapes, disguise, and coded messages. They learned how to anticipate danger before it arrived, how to blend into a crowd when necessary, how to make themselves invisible when survival demanded it. In some regions, Jewish communities formed silent militias, groups of young men trained in hand-to-hand combat, capable of protecting their people when no one else would. They could not fight wars. They could not challenge armies. But they could outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast every enemy that came for them. And time again, they did. The legacy of resilience, how they never broke the world, tried to erase them. But they learned to write their survival in the spaces between the lines. They were forced into ghettos, so they built invisible economies inside them. They were banned from professions, so they created industries that kings would depend on. They were silenced, so they spoke in codes no one could break. They were threatened, so they fought without ever lifting a sword. They were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be powerless. Yet, against all odds, they stood unshaken, because survival wasn't just an instinct, it was their greatest masterpiece. But as history would soon show, even the strongest walls can crack, because the world was changing, and the greatest storm in Ashkenazi history was yet to come. Would their resilience be enough? Or was their darkest chapter still ahead? Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything. For centuries, the Ashkenazi Jews have carried their history in whispers, etched in exile, hidden in traditions, woven into the very fabric of survival. But even now, in an age of science and discovery, secrets remain. What if the story isn't finished? What if the past still has mysteries waiting to be unraveled? With the rise of genetics, DNA has become the new storyteller. Research has revealed astonishing connections, linking Ashkenazi ancestry across continents, uncovering lost branches of families thought to be erased by history. Hidden migrations, once debated, are now traced in strands of genetic code. What if science proves what history could not? What if buried beneath centuries of exile lies a forgotten past waiting to be reclaimed? Lost traditions, can they ever return? As communities modernized, some traditions were left behind. Rituals, dialects, ancient customs slowly fading into memory. But now there's a shift. The younger generation is searching for what was lost, reviving ancient melodies, relearning Yiddish, unearthing forgotten practices that once defined their ancestors. Can the past find a place in the future? Every uncovered secret leads to another question. What happened to the lost Jewish kingdoms? What stories have yet to be told? What legacies remain buried beneath the ruins of history? Maybe the answers are still out there, waiting, like the Ashkenazi people once did, for the right moment to rise again. For 500 years, the Ashkenazi Jews have walked through fire, endured exile, built empires in the shadows, and carried the weight of a history the world tried to erase. They were survivors, thinkers, warriors without weapons, crafting a legacy that shaped the modern world. But this is not just their past. It is their present. It is their future, even with all we have uncovered. The lost kingdoms, the secret networks, the unbreakable resilience, there are still questions. Mysteries buried beneath time, waiting to be revealed. What stories remain untold? What secrets are still hidden in forgotten texts, in unmarked graves, in the memories of those who never got to share them? If this history fascinated you, If you felt the weight of these forgotten stories, then don't let them disappear again. Like this video, because every like pushes this history further into the world. Comment below. Tell us which secret surprised you the most. Subscribe, because there is so much more to uncover. And most importantly, watch till the end, because every detail matters. Every story deserves to be heard. The Ashkenazi Jews carried their history through centuries. Now, it's time for us to carry it forward. Are you ready for the next discovery? Stay with us, because history is far from over.